Marcus Thompson adjusted his camera strap as he stepped off the tour bus in central London. The 28-year-old software developer from Phoenix had saved for 2 years for this European vacation, and London was his first stop. The crisp autumn morning filled him with excitement as he joined the crowd of tourists gathering around Buckingham Palace. "This is it," he whispered to himself, pulling out his phone to video call his girlfriend Sarah back home. "Babe, look at this place. It's even more amazing than the pictures." Sarah's sleepy face appeared on the screen. It was still early morning in Arizona. "Oh wow, Marcus. Are you seeing any of those guards with the big hats?" Marcus grinned and flipped his camera around. "Actually, yeah. There's one right over there. Hold on, let me get closer." He had heard stories about the Queen's Guard before, how they stood perfectly still, never breaking character, no matter what tourists did around them. Marcus had watched countless YouTube videos of people trying to make them laugh or react, usually failing. But he had also seen a few where tourists got creative and actually got some kind of response. The guard stood at attention near the palace gates, his red uniform pristine, his black bearskin hat adding nearly a foot to his impressive height. His rifle was positioned perfectly at his side and his eyes stared straight ahead with military precision. Marcus had never seen such discipline in person. "These guys are supposed to be like statues," Marcus explained to Sarah through his phone. "Watch this, I'm going to try something funny." What Marcus didn't realize was that these weren't just ceremonial guards. Each member of the Queen's Guard was an active soldier in the British Army, trained in combat and tasked with protecting one of the most important locations in the United Kingdom. They had real authority, real weapons, and real responsibilities that went far beyond standing still for tourist photos. Marcus approached slowly, his phone still recording for Sarah, and now also for his social media followers. He had gained quite a following on his travel blog, and he knew a good video of him interacting with a British Royal Guard could go viral. The potential for fame and internet points clouded his better judgment. The guard remained motionless as Marcus got within a few feet. Other tourists watched with interest, some pulling out their own cameras to record what might happen next. A few seasoned London locals noticed the scene developing and shook their heads, recognizing the signs of a tourist about to make a serious mistake. "Sarah, are you getting this?" Marcus whispered into his phone. "I'm going to see if I can get him to move or say something. This is going to be epic." He started with small gestures, waving his hand near the guard's face, making funny expressions and trying to catch his eye. The guard remained perfectly still, exactly as his training demanded. Marcus felt emboldened by the lack of response and decided to escalate his efforts. "Maybe I need to be more creative," he said to his phone, speaking louder now. Several other tourists had gathered around to watch the show, creating a small crowd. "These guys are supposed to be unbreakable, right? Let's see about that." Marcus reached into his backpack and pulled out a small souvenir Union Jack flag he had purchased earlier. He began waving it enthusiastically near the guard's face, then tried placing it gently against the guard's arm. Still no response. The crowd grew larger, with some people encouraging Marcus and others looking uncomfortable with the situation. A few British tourists exchanged worried glances, understanding the cultural and legal boundaries that Marcus was unknowingly approaching. "This isn't working," Marcus muttered, becoming frustrated that his video wasn't turning out as entertaining as he had hoped. "I need to try something bigger." He looked around and noticed the guard's rifle. In his mind, shaped by Hollywood movies and internet videos, Marcus saw it as just another prop in this elaborate show. He had no understanding of military protocol, no knowledge of British law regarding interference with armed guards, and no appreciation for the serious nature of the guard's duties. "Sarah, watch this," Marcus said with growing confidence, completely unaware that he was about to cross a line that would transform his dream vacation into a nightmare. "I'm going to really test this guy's discipline." The morning sun climbed higher as more tourists gathered, cameras ready, social media accounts prepared for what they thought would be another harmless tourist prank. None of them, including Marcus, understood that they were about to witness a costly lesson in respect, cultural awareness, and the serious consequences of treating real soldiers like tourist attractions. Marcus took a deep breath and moved closer to the guard. The crowd behind him had grown to nearly 20 people, all with phones and cameras pointed in his direction. He felt the pressure to deliver something spectacular for his audience. Both, live and digital. "Okay, here goes nothing," he announced, reaching out slowly toward the guard's rifle. The moment Marcus's fingers made contact with the weapon, everything changed in an instant. "Step back. Do not touch the rifle." The guard's voice thundered across the courtyard with such force that several tourists jumped backward in shock. His previous statue-like stillness exploded into swift, practiced movement as he stepped forward, positioning himself between Marcus and the rifle with military precision. Marcus stumbled backward, his phone clattering to the ground as the reality of his situation hit him like a cold wave. This wasn't a performer in a costume. This was a real soldier, and Marcus had just touched a real weapon. I'm sorry. I was just..." Marcus stammered, his face turning pale as he realized the gravity of his mistake. "Remain where you are," the guard commanded, his training taking over completely. Within seconds, he had alerted his colleagues through his communication system. Security breach at Gate 2. Tourist made contact with weapon. The crowd that had been eagerly recording moments before suddenly dispersed like startled birds. Phones disappeared into pockets as people realized they had just witnessed something far more serious than a harmless prank. Several tourists hurried away entirely, not wanting to be associated with what was clearly becoming a security incident. Sarah's voice crackled through Marcus's fallen phone, now face down on the pavement. "Marcus? Marcus, what's happening? I heard shouting." But Marcus couldn't respond. He stood frozen, watching as additional guards appeared seemingly from nowhere. These weren't the ceremonial guards he had expected to encounter. These were armed police officers and security personnel who treated every potential threat with deadly seriousness. A senior guard approached, his medals and stripes indicating years of service and authority. His expression was stern but controlled as he assessed the situation. "Sir, you are in violation of the Official Secrets Act and have interfered with a member of Her Majesty's Guard in the performance of his duties," the senior guard said in a crisp British accent that carried the weight of law behind it. "You need to come with us immediately." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Wait, this is just a misunderstanding. I'm a tourist. I didn't know I couldn't touch. I thought..." "What you thought is irrelevant, sir," the senior guard replied firmly. "What matters is what you did. Touching a guard's weapon is a serious offense under British law, regardless of your intentions or nationality." Two police officers arrived on the scene, their presence making the situation even more real for Marcus. He watched in growing horror as they spoke quietly with the guards, occasionally glancing in his direction while taking notes. A small crowd of onlookers had reformed at a respectful distance, but their cameras were now hidden. Word had spread quickly through the area that this wasn't entertainment. This was a genuine security incident that could have serious legal consequences for everyone involved. One of the police officers, a woman with sergeant stripes, approached Marcus with a professional demeanor that was both calm and intimidating. "Sir, I need to see your identification and your passport," she said, producing a small notebook from her uniform pocket. "What you've done today constitutes interference with military personnel and tampering with military equipment. These are charges that we take very seriously in the United Kingdom." Marcus's hands shook as he reached for his passport. All his dreams of viral videos and social media fame crumbled as the reality of British law enforcement efficiency became clear. This wasn't like the movies where a tourist could talk their way out of trouble with charm and apologies. "Officer, please," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. "I had no idea this was illegal. In America, we don't have guards like this. I thought it was just for show, like at Disney World or something." The sergeant's expression didn't change as she examined his passport and began recording his information. "Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Mr. Thompson. These guards are active-duty soldiers protecting one of our nation's most important sites. They carry loaded weapons and have the authority to use them if necessary." The weight of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Loaded weapons, real soldiers, real consequences. Behind him, he could hear his phone still transmitting Sarah's increasingly frantic voice as she tried to understand what was happening to her boyfriend, thousands of miles away. But Marcus couldn't focus on her calls. He was too busy watching his dream vacation transform into what looked like it might become an international incident. The sergeant finished recording Marcus's passport information and looked up at him with the practiced eye of someone who had dealt with countless tourists over the years. "Mr. Thompson, you're going to need to come with us to answer some questions," she said, closing her notebook with a definitive snap. "This incident needs to be properly documented and investigated." Marcus felt his legs go weak. "Investigated? But I didn't hurt anyone. I barely touched the rifle for a second." "Sir, the duration of contact is irrelevant," the sergeant replied, patiently but firmly. "You interfered with a military guard and made physical contact with his weapon. In post-9/11 security protocols, we cannot treat any such incident as harmless, regardless of intent." A police van had arrived during their conversation, and Marcus watched in growing panic as other tourists stared at the developing scene. Some were taking discreet photos from a distance, though most seemed to understand the serious nature of what was happening. The original guard who Marcus had approached remained at his post, but his posture had subtly changed. He was clearly more alert now, his eyes scanning the crowd for any other potential threats. The incident had disrupted the normal routine, and Marcus began to understand that his actions had affected more than just himself. "Please, officers," Marcus said, his voice becoming desperate. "This is my first day in London. I've never been to Europe before. I saved for 2 years for this trip. Can't we just, I don't know, can't I just apologize and promise never to do it again?" The sergeant exchanged a glance with her colleague, a tall constable who had been quietly observing the situation. Their shared look contained years of experience dealing with tourists who thought foreign laws didn't apply to them. "Mr. Thompson, I understand this is your vacation," the sergeant said, her tone softening slightly while remaining professional. "But British law applies to everyone on British soil, regardless of where they're from or why they're here. The guards protecting Buckingham Palace are not tourist attractions. They're active military personnel with real jobs protecting real people." Marcus picked up his phone from the ground, noticing the screen had cracked during the fall. Sarah's call had ended, but he could see 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages flooding his notifications. "Can I at least call my girlfriend and let her know what's happening?" Marcus asked, holding up the damaged phone. "She was on video chat when this all started. She's probably terrified." The constable nodded. "You'll have an opportunity to make a phone call once we get to the station, sir. Right now we need to focus on processing this incident properly." As they began walking toward the police van, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in its tinted windows. Just an hour earlier, he had been an excited tourist with a bright smile and adventurous spirit. Now he looked pale, shaken, and completely out of his depth. The senior guard who had initially responded to the incident approached the group as they prepared to leave. "Sergeant Morrison," he said, addressing the police officer with obvious familiarity. "I'll need a copy of the incident report for our records. Command will want a full briefing on this." "Of course, Color Sergeant Williams," she replied. "We'll have everything documented within the hour." Marcus listened to their professional exchange and realized that his impulsive moment had triggered a whole chain of official procedures involving multiple government agencies. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about security protocols, international incident reporting, and military readiness procedures that he couldn't even begin to understand. "What happens now?" Marcus asked quietly as they reached the police van. "I mean, what's the worst-case scenario here?" Sergeant Morrison paused before opening the van door. "That depends on a lot of factors, Mr. Thompson. Your cooperation, your previous record, the final assessment of the security threat level, and the decision of the Crown Prosecution Service about whether to file formal charges." "Charges?" Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "What kind of charges?" "Potentially several," the constable replied matter-of-factly. "Interference with military personnel in the performance of their duties, tampering with military equipment, creating a public disturbance, and depending on how the security assessment goes, possibly charges related to threatening national security." Marcus had to grab the van's doorframe to steady himself. National security? He was a software developer from Phoenix who had never even gotten a speeding ticket. The idea that he could be charged with threatening national security seemed surreal and terrifying. As he climbed into the police van, Marcus caught one last glimpse of Buckingham Palace. The morning sun was still shining, tourists were still taking photos, and the guards were still standing at their posts with perfect discipline. Everything looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier, except now Marcus understood that he had never really understood what he was looking at. His dream European vacation had become a nightmare, and he was beginning to realize that the consequences of his harmless prank might follow him for years to come. The police station was nothing like what Marcus had imagined from television shows. Instead of dramatic interrogation rooms and harsh lighting, he found himself in a clean, efficient building that felt more like a government office than a place where criminals were processed. Sergeant Morrison led him to a small interview room with plain white walls, a metal table, and 3 plastic chairs. The fluorescent lighting hummed softly overhead, and Marcus could hear the distant sounds of phones ringing and keyboards clicking through the thin walls. "Mr. Thompson, before we begin, I need to inform you of your rights under British law," Sergeant Morrison said, settling into her chair across from him. "You have the right to remain silent, but anything you do say may be used as evidence. You have the right to legal representation, and if you cannot afford a solicitor, one will be provided for you." Marcus nodded numbly, still struggling to process that he was actually sitting in a police station being read his rights. 3 hours earlier, he had been planning which London attractions to visit next. "I need to ask you some questions about the incident at Buckingham Palace," and the sergeant continued, opening a thick file folder. "Let's start with the basics. What was your intention when you approached the Royal Guard?" Marcus took a shaky breath. "Honestly, I was just trying to make a fun video for my girlfriend and my social media followers. I'd seen videos online of tourists trying to make the guards react, and I thought it would be harmless entertainment." "And what made you decide to touch the guard's rifle?" Sergeant Morrison asked, making notes as she spoke. "I don't know," Marcus replied, running his hands through his hair. "I wasn't thinking clearly. The guard wasn't reacting to anything else I tried, and I guess I got caught up in trying to create content that would get views and likes. It was incredibly stupid, and I regret it completely." The sergeant looked up from her notes. "Mr. Thompson, do you understand the difference between the Royal Guards and, say, performers at a theme park?" Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I do now. I realize they're real soldiers with real weapons doing a real job. But honestly, before today, I just thought of them as part of the tourist experience, like the changing of the guard ceremony." "That's a common misconception among visitors," Sergeant Morrison acknowledged. "But it's a dangerous one. These guards are trained combat soldiers who have served in active war zones. They're not entertainers, and their weapons are not props." There was a knock on the door, and the constable who had been at Buckingham Palace entered with a folder of his own. "Sergeant, I have the preliminary security assessment," he said, handing her the documents. "Also, there's been a development. The incident was recorded by multiple tourists and has already been posted on several social media platforms." Marcus felt his stomach drop even further. "What kind of development?" Sergeant Morrison reviewed the documents quickly before responding. "It appears that your encounter with the Royal Guard has already gone viral on social media, Mr. Thompson. There are currently 6 different videos of the incident circulating on various platforms, with thousands of views and hundreds of comments." "Oh God," Marcus whispered, burying his face in his hands. "This is getting worse and worse." "The good news," the sergeant continued, "is that the security assessment concluded that you posed no credible threat to the palace or the royal family. Your actions appear to have been foolish rather than malicious." Marcus looked up hopefully. "Does that mean I can go?" "I'm afraid it's not that simple," the constable replied. "While the security threat has been downgraded, you still violated several laws. The Crown Prosecution Service will need to review the case and decide whether to file formal charges." "How long does that take?" Marcus asked, already dreading the answer. "It could be anywhere from a few days to several weeks," Sergeant Morrison explained. "In the meantime, you'll be released on police bail with certain conditions." She pulled out another form and began filling it out. "You'll need to surrender your passport and remain in the United Kingdom until this matter is resolved. You'll also be required to check in with this police station every 48 hours. Marcus felt like the room was spinning. But my return flight is in 12 days. I have a job to get back to. I can't afford to stay in London indefinitely. I understand your concerns, Mr. Thompson, but these are the standard conditions for this type of case. The sergeant replied sympathetically. You may want to contact your employer and your airline to explain the situation. And a lawyer, the constable added. You'll definitely want to contact a solicitor who specializes in these matters. The duty solicitor here can give you some initial advice, but for something like this, you'll want proper representation. Marcus thought about his savings account, carefully built up over 2 years to pay for this dream vacation. Now it looked like he might be spending all of it on legal fees and extended accommodation costs instead of enjoying European sights. There is one more thing, Sergeant Morrison said, her tone becoming more serious. Given the viral nature of the videos, there's been significant media interest in this case. You should be prepared for the possibility that reporters may try to contact you. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to imagine explaining to his boss, his parents, and his friends that his London vacation had turned into an international incident involving the British legal system and viral social media coverage. When he opened them again, both officers were looking at him with what might have been sympathy, but it was hard to tell through their professional demeanor. Can I make that phone call now? Marcus asked quietly. I need to try to explain this to Sarah before she sees it on the internet. The phone call to Sarah was one of the most difficult conversations Marcus had ever had. Sitting in a small room at the police station, he tried to explain how a simple tourist video had spiraled into legal trouble and international embarrassment. Marcus, I don't understand. Sarah's voice was tight with worry and confusion. People mess with those guards all the time in videos. How is this different? Apparently, actually touching their weapon is completely different from just making faces or waving at them, Marcus explained, his voice hoarse from stress. I crossed a line I didn't even know existed. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. What does this mean for us? For your job? Marcus, you're supposed to start that new project next Monday. I know, Marcus replied, feeling the weight of his situation settling in even more heavily. I have to call my boss next and try to explain why I can't come back to work on schedule. This is going to ruin everything, isn't it? After ending the call with Sarah, Marcus spent the next hour making increasingly difficult phone calls. His boss at the software company was understanding but clearly frustrated about the project delays. His parents were shocked and worried. Each conversation made the reality of his situation more concrete and more devastating. The duty solicitor, a middle-aged woman named Helen Crawford, arrived in the late afternoon. She reviewed Marcus's case with the practiced efficiency of someone who had handled hundreds of similar situations. The good news is that this is clearly not a terrorism-related incident, she told Marcus as they sat in the consultation room. The bad news is that interfering with royal guards is taken very seriously by the British legal system, especially in the current security climate. What's the worst-case scenario? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. If the Crown Prosecution Service decides to prosecute fully, you could be looking at a fine of several £1,000s and potentially a short jail sentence, Crawford replied matter-of-factly. More likely, given that this is your first offense, and there was clearly no malicious intent, you'd probably receive a caution and a fine. But either way, I'll have a criminal record in the UK? Marcus asked. Yes, and depending on the charges, it could affect your ability to travel internationally in the future, Crawford confirmed. Many countries, including the United States, ask about criminal convictions on visa applications. Marcus felt like he was trapped in a nightmare that kept getting worse. His impulse to create entertaining social media content had potentially damaged his career prospects for years to come. Over the next 3 days, while Marcus waited for the Crown Prosecution Service to make their decision, the viral videos of his encounter continued to spread. British tabloids picked up the story with headlines like, "Clueless American Tourists Royal Guard Blunder," and "When Social Media Pranks Go Wrong." Marcus found himself afraid to leave his hotel room, worried that someone might recognize him from the videos. The few times he did venture out, he wore sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. On the fourth day, he received a call from Solicitor Crawford with news that was both better and worse than he had expected. The Crown Prosecution Service has decided not to pursue the most serious charges, she informed him. However, they are offering you a caution for interference with military personnel and a fine of $2,000. What does that mean exactly? Marcus asked. A caution means you're admitting guilt but avoiding court proceedings, Crawford explained. You'll have a record of the caution, but it's less serious than a criminal conviction. The fine is significant but manageable, and most importantly, you'll be able to return home once everything is processed. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. Will this affect my ability to travel in the future? It could, Crawford replied honestly. You'll need to declare it on visa applications, and some countries may view it negatively, but it's much better than the alternative charges you were potentially facing. That evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room looking at the viral videos of himself on various social media platforms. The comments ranged from supportive, poor guy, honest mistake, to harshly critical, typical ignorant American tourist, to mockingly humorous, when keeping it real goes wrong. He realized that beyond the legal consequences, he would now forever be known as that American tourist who touched the Royal Guard's gun. The internet had immortalized his moment of poor judgment in a way that would follow him indefinitely. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Saw the news coverage. Are you okay? When can you come home? Marcus stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Soon, I hope. But I think I'm going to be dealing with the consequences of this for a very long time. As he prepared for bed that night, Marcus reflected on how quickly everything had changed. A week ago, he had been an excited tourist with dreams of adventure and social media fame. Now he was someone whose mistake had become an international, cautionary tale about cultural awareness, legal consequences, and the dangers of prioritizing online content over common sense. 6 months later, Marcus sat in his Phoenix apartment staring at his laptop screen. The videos of his encounter with the Royal Guard had accumulated over 2 million views across various platforms, and he still received daily comments and messages about the incident. His return to work had been awkward but manageable. His colleagues had mostly moved past the initial curiosity and jokes, though he still occasionally heard whispered references to the London incident when he walked by groups of co-workers. The $2,000 fine had depleted his savings significantly, and the extended stay in London had cost him another $3,000 in hotel bills, legal fees, and living expenses. His dream European vacation had ended up costing him nearly 3 times what he had originally budgeted, with none of the enjoyment he had anticipated. More challenging than the financial cost, however, were the ongoing consequences he continued to discover. When he had applied for a business visa to attend a conference in Canada, he had been required to declare his British caution. The application process took months longer than usual, and he had to provide extensive documentation explaining the incident. His social media presence, once focused on travel and technology content, had been permanently altered. No matter what he posted, comments about the London incident inevitably appeared. He had considered deleting all his accounts, but his job in digital marketing made maintaining some online presence necessary. Sarah had remained supportive throughout the ordeal, but Marcus could tell that his moment of poor judgment had affected their relationship. She had become more cautious about his spontaneous tendencies, and they had disagreed several times about his travel plans and social media activities. I just don't understand why you can't let it go, she had said during a recent conversation about a potential trip to Mexico. Every time we talk about traveling, you get this look like you're expecting something terrible to happen. She was right. The confidence and adventurous spirit that had once defined Marcus's approach to life had been replaced by anxiety and second-guessing. He found himself researching local laws and customs obsessively before making any travel plans, and he had completely stopped creating any kind of social media content that involved interacting with strangers or unfamiliar situations. The most surprising consequence had been the messages he received from other tourists who had found themselves in similar situations around the world. Apparently, His viral mistake had resonated with people who had also learned hard lessons about cultural differences and legal boundaries while traveling. One message particularly stuck with him, from a woman named Jennifer who had been arrested in Thailand for inadvertently violating photography laws at a religious site. Your story helped me realize I wasn't alone in making a stupid mistake while traveling. It's oddly comforting to know that other people have learned expensive lessons about respecting local laws and customs. These messages had given Marcus an idea. Rather than trying to hide from his mistake, he began writing about it honestly and constructively. He started a blog series called Costly Mistakes Learning from Travel Disasters, where he shared his experience and invited others to contribute their own stories. The response was overwhelming. Within 3 months, he had received hundreds of submissions from travelers around the world who had faced legal troubles, cultural misunderstandings, or expensive mistakes during their trips. The blog became a resource for travelers to learn about potential pitfalls and prepare more thoughtfully for international travel. Marcus realized that his embarrassing moment had inadvertently created something valuable. While he would never recommend the experience he had gone through, he had found a way to transform his mistake into something that might help others avoid similar problems. A year after the London incident, Marcus received an unexpected email from Color Sergeant Williams, the senior guard who had been involved in his case. The message was brief but surprisingly warm. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you won't mind me reaching out. I wanted you to know that we've been using your case as an educational example in our tourist liaison training. Your blog posts about the experience have been quite helpful in helping our personnel understand the tourist perspective. While I certainly cannot recommend your methods, I appreciate that you've turned a difficult situation into something constructive. Best regards, and I hope your future travels are more peaceful." Marcus read the message several times, feeling a complex mixture of embarrassment and pride. His moment of poor judgment had indeed become educational, just not in the way he had originally intended. As he prepared for a carefully planned trip to Ireland with Sarah, Marcus reflected on how much he had changed since that morning at Buckingham Palace. He was more thoughtful, more respectful of cultural differences, and much more aware of the potential consequences of his actions. The viral fame he had accidentally achieved wasn't the kind he had originally wanted, but it had taught him valuable lessons about respect, responsibility, and the real cost of treating other people's jobs and cultures as entertainment. Sometimes, he realized, the most expensive mistakes turned out to be the most valuable learning experiences, even if he would never recommend them to anyone else.